So yeah, it's lovely to be. I love doing these talks when I know about half of the people in the audience. You know, that's always wonderful. So I get maybe where I'll start is just sort of quick show of hands. Who here has heard of Gray Smith before? Oh, good. That's a good number. For those who who have sort of seen his pictures. Okay, so we've seen them going down a little bit. So what I want to do today is sort of give you a bit of a tour through Gray's, work of art and some of the history, if you like, involved. And really, for me, by the way, this is obviously Gray here. He's about, I think, 49 at this stage. He's at his house in Turner in Canberra. And one of the really useful things to know here is that John Reed, John and Sunday Reed, who started this whole Heide thing, they bought the house for him in Canberra. And this is part of the, sort of showing support for the artists that they thought were, particularly special and needed that sort of support. And so this is a theme that goes through today's talk, just how much appreciation they had for Gray's work, right? And the support that they gave him. Now, I've sort of been connected to this family. I think 1983 is the sort of start date, and I was just saying to Heather that one of the interesting things that happened very early on. I was in Sheen's house, Joan and Ian, her parents, and the phone rings, and I was the only one around, so I answered it, and on the phone was, "Oh, it's Sid Nolan here. Can I talk to Joni?" And it was my first real thought that, wow, this is the connected family in the Australian art world, right? Sidney Nolan there. But then I guess I only had a chance to meet Gray once, right? So it was just before the end of his life. He'd been moved into, he was living in a sort of small bed set, had a big grey, I remember a big grey beard, like a sort of Santa Claus type beard that he had back then. So since then, it's really learning about through people, through the family, through more reading, through sort of the interest in his artworks. Now, one of the things that I came across, which is probably the heart of this talk, is just this idea of how do people become popular in the art world, and how do you fall out of popularity, right? And I thought that could be the sort of major theme for what I'm going to talk about today. So I have these sort of four ideas, like this artistic popularity really does emerge haphazardly, right? This is the thing people don't understand. They think it's the most, people who, if you like, deserve it the most will be the most popular. Well, it turns out that's really not the case. And of course, you gain momentum. Once you become a little bit famous, you get more fame and more fame and more fame. And next thing you know, you're the big names in the field. And whoever gets in early, of course, they're the ones who get reinforced. And if you want to re-enter later, that's pretty tough going. It usually has to have something quite remarkable to happen before you get back into that popularity. Now, as I'll show, Gray was right there at the beginning of this Australian modern art movement, and he was highly regarded in that time, but he slipped out. He slipped out of that popularity. And so really, I guess this talk is about what happened and why he belongs back, right? That's sort of the idea that I've got here. Now, maybe the place to start this talk too is tell you how I end up just here giving this talk, right? So Sheena and I, we went to Always Modern, which is up in the cottage there. You can go and have a look. The exhibition there, and there was a big sign that sort of said the Heide story and how the Heide story was, made up these modernist artists, and we thought, oh, this is great, maybe we'll see a Gray Smith painting. And so we walked around, no Gray Smith paintings. And so we went, oh, that's disappointing. And then I thought, I'm going to count up who's actually represented in this exhibition. And this is my, sort of list, if you like. So, of course, Sidney Nolan's up the top, goes all the way down to Adrian Lawler. And so some of these names you'll see over and over again in, when people are talking Australian modern art, in especially Heide and other places. Now, I did have a chat to Kendra Morgan, who's the curator for this exhibition, and I sort of said, oh, why isn't Gray, in the exhibition? And she said, well, there's actually 22 paintings of Gray's in the collection here at Heide, right? But what Kendra was saying is that that collection is not, it was sort of like, what would happen is Gray would do little sketches and send them off to John Reed in letters and sort of little thank you notes. And it was this little thing about saying thank you and help, you know, sort of saying, hey, I'm doing this interesting stuff. But it wasn't really his main work, right? So what they've got in the gallery is not probably the very best work that he has. And again, I'll show you that maybe they've missed the Melbourne element of it is such a small slice of his whole career. And I want you to sort of expand your understanding of Gray and what he did after Heide. Now, a little bit of background. Gray was trained, if you like, initially by Max Meldrum, sort of in the 40s. And 43 to 45, I think he was sort of learning from Max Meldrum. And, you know, that sort of set him off. And he was also really someone who exhibited, as we heard, exhibited in this sort of the Contemporary Art Society was something that he was very involved in. So from about 45 to 50, you know, he's in there showing artwork in the Contemporary Art Society. Now, just to give you a sense of the type of paintings he was making, so in the 40s, this is a self-portrait of Gray. You know, so in fact, this painting was part of a Heide exhibition. I think it was John Perceval and Friends, I think it was, John Perceval and Friends. Then in the 50s, you know, he has a big interest in rural sort of settings, the isolated man out in the bush. That was certainly a recurring theme for him. Now, the 1960s, you're now starting to see, I suppose, you know, sort of the style he became known for, if you like, starting to emerge. And this is a picture of Sheena, who's here tonight, or here today. And then in the 70s, big pictures of, you know, sort of mythological, in this case, I say mythological, but you know, the Endeavour going across the ocean. So this is his Captain Cook series. Now, if we go back in time, this building is a very important building, right? This was sort of Gray's brother Martin and his mother's sort of shop slash picture framing business, right? And the reason why it's important, Martin and Rosie, his wife, had an amazing ability to attract lots and lots of different creative and artists, right? And it was a place where, you know, people got together and connected. They were very, you know, obviously Martin was the framer for Sidney Nolan and, you know, Blackman and others. And they would get together out here on a Friday afternoon, Friday night drinks, all the artists would turn up and, you know, have good old chat and a catch up. I think Rosie takes the kids up down the Christabel. Their house was sort of down this alley here, or this crescent down here. Take all the kids away, and they would have a sesh there. So this becomes, you know, a pretty key place in the history of Heide, if you like, in many ways. But for Gray, one of the big things that happen, of course, is when Gray gets together with Joy Hester. So this is 1947, and a couple of things are interesting here. This is the time where both Gray and Joy are at their height of creativity. Like there's so much going on, like they're painting their skins off, you know, in terms of making pictures and making paintings. And they say that Joy's work at that time, her series on the lovers, of course that's Gray behind her there, you know, it was one of the, you know, her most outstanding sort of series. It was like the Faces series, the Lovers series. There's a couple of different things that are going on at that time. And at that time, you know, they moved up to Sydney for a moment, for about a year. You know, they're dead poor. You know, there's not much money going around. They find a place in Sydney, actually in Piper's Point, right? So the poshdom of Sydney, they've got this free little apartment above someone's house, and Gray's got the free apartment on the basis that he can stoke the fires for this family. So he goes and stokes their fires every morning. And anyway, they find out, and this is a key thread, they find out that Gray has got epilepsy, and they kick him out of the home, right? Because back then, to have epilepsy was a real taboo sort of subject, right? We don't think of it now, but, you know, so this is something that sort of played through his life, and I'll sort of touch on a few different places where this has a big impact for him. So, and you know, some artists were churning, like Sidney Nolan was churning out paintings like crazy. Gray wasn't being able to paint as much, right? So he had a much smaller, you know, sort of set of art that he was able to show in the world. But here's the thing, the level of admiration he had from the people at Heide was, you know, like really top level. So one example is John Reid on the sort of inauguration of his new museum, the Museum of Modern Art of Australia. So it's like a precursor for Heide. It was in Tavistock Place in the city, right? He sends a Gray Smith painting to MoMA in New York to commemorate that, right? Now, you think about it. John Reid could have sent a Nolan, he could have sent a Boyd, he could have sent, like he'd had a myriad other possibilities. But no, he sends a Gray Smith, right? And he doesn't send it in any normal way. They get this guy, Lex Davison, who's this Grand Prix car driver, big winner at the time, and he's heading off to New York for something that he's doing. So he just literally has the painting under his arm in first class, and away they go, and they sort of deliver it to MoMA. So, yeah, the sort of level of appreciation for his work was high. Now, but then there's the flip side to this, right? So in this book here, so it's a very, maybe it's a bit a geeky read, I'd say, but you know, these are all the letters between John Reid and, you know, people who, you know, are important to him, right? And you can sort of see, I mean, he wrote back and forwards to Gray all the time, right? Now, but you know, here he is, this is John Reid talking to essentially the director of the Museum of Modern Art, and he sort of says, the future of Gray Smith, about whose work we disagreed, remains uncertain, as he's been almost continually ill and paints very little. The future of Nolan, etc., about which we also disagree, so this guy didn't like Nolan or Gray's paintings, seems obviously reasonably well assured, because, you know, he was churning out the paintings, right? So this is the thing. Now, another thing that sort of happened around that time, the 60s, 50s and 60s, John Reid puts together a book. He wants to show who are all the best painters, you know, the ones who are going to make a difference in the art world. Of course, impossible to predict, right? But he says that, you know, my intention is to present Australian painters who have added something new and vital to our art in the past 10 years. So again, I think there was 40 painters, and one of Gray's pictures are in that. In fact, this one is in the National Gallery of Australia. So you can go visit and have a look at that. Now, one last sort of indicator of all this, if you like, is just this quote that I pulled from a biography by Philip Jones. And I think Philip Jones was the inaugural sort of assistant director of Heide, right? Or the precursor to Heide. And he sort of says here, you know, next to my board hung another moonlit painting, Gray Smith's Rider at Night. Its qualities, aesthetic and tonal, stood up very well to the Boyd. Gray is a much underrated artist. But this is the bit I thought was interesting. One of Gray's painting, as I write now, hangs in my kitchen in St Kilda Road, excites more comment than any other work in my possession, right? And you just think, this guy would have had an amazing collection, yeah, right? I don't know. You know him or knew him? Yeah. So I think these sort of give you a sense of, you know, just how much interest and appreciation there was for his work. But then, it's funny, I gave a version of this talk to Canberra, in Canberra, at the Drill Hall Gallery. And I said, and then he moved to Canberra. And they all, I thought they were going to jump up and beat me up, right? But it's fact, you know, in 61 he moves to Canberra, and it's a different world. Canberra was such a small place in the 60s, right? I was brought up in Canberra, so there was not a lot happening there, and especially from an art perspective, you were really changing who could see your pictures, right? So he moves there. And just to give you a sense of the pictures that he was creating, you know, in that period. So, you know, we've got this one here, grid. Again, you know, rural sort of pictures, man with a milk pail. That's quite a big picture. It's like 1.2 metres by 90 centimetres. He also won a prize from Qantas the prize was originally for him and John Perceval to go to France to do a whole range of exhibitions. John Perceval got ill, and so Arthur Wicks ended up going to Paris with him. So this is one of his Parisian pictures. and then sort of later on in this sort of the later period of his painting. Now, so there was that move to Canberra, which I think took him out of the sort of the view, right? But there was something else that was happening, which I think was quite fundamental in how the perception of him changed, right? And I think it was this book published by Joy Hester, right? So one of the things I noticed is when you read through it, there's 100 mentions of Gray Smith in that book, right? Only 2 of them mention him as a painter, right? 100 mentions, only 2. And these are the mentions, right? They're not the most, effusive mentions. Joy and Gray Smith had exhibited in the 46th Contemporary Art Society exhibition, okay? Gray had known some of Joy's friends at the gallery school in 38. He studied under Max Meldrum and would sometimes visit the gallery school, though nothing about the place excited him to study there. Right? So she was really bigging him up, wasn't she? So I think this is the beginning. And there was something else. At the time, there's painting up a storm together, yet, they're sort of being diminished in some of these publications, and they became very popular. This is the publication that really pushed Joy into the public again, and it sort of started the ball rolling for her, and her reintroduction, well, not even reintroduction, first introduction into that area of popularity of artists, right? But then there was this other, sort of a throwaway line, I think, this idea that Gray was a picture framer. They use it as almost like a derogatory term, No, he wasn't a painter, he was a picture framer, right? And so, you sort of see it. There was, in Australian Gothic, can you believe that? He cried, she ran off with a picture frame. Now, that's Albert Tucker, right? He's not going to be very happy with Gray, right, because for obvious reasons. But this sort of starts, and then there's this Pi O, who's a poet here in Melbourne. Actually, he's just won the Patrick White Literature for his poetry. So, he's an amazing guy. But anyway, he's got a book about as thick as this, right, called Heide. And the whole thing is just one poem, right? And so this is just one little segment out of it. It says, she threw a few drink parties and invited some painters over like Gray Smith, a Max Meldrum boy, a lumberjack, nothing but a picture framer, as Tucker would say later. So these things sort of changes the way in people start to see Gray's work, I think, a little bit. Maybe that move to Canberra and taking out of the main conversation that was happening in Melbourne, for example, about who were the picture makers viewing that we should see. Now, I want to sort of go a little sidebar here, right? I think I need a little sidebar just to give you a different perspective on this, right? And because we're going to jump into French Impressionism, only for a moment, I promise you, only for a moment. So this fellow, Gustave Caillebotte, was an interesting fellow because he was right at the early days of Impressionists, and he was an artist himself. This is a self-portrait, but unlike all the other artists at that time in that area, he was a multi-millionaire, right? And his parents had a big industrial sort of business. They all passed away, gave him millions of dollars. He said, look, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be an artist, right? And with that millions of dollars, he thought what he should do is buy his friends' paintings because no one else was buying them, right? Now, it turns out his friends were Monet, Degas, Renoir, Cézanne, Manet, Picasso, and Sicily, right? Now, he had a premonition that he was going to die early, so he wrote out his will, and he said, my collection of these 7 painters, and that's all he had these 7 painters, no one had ever heard of them, he said, I want to donate that to the National Gallery when I die. Anyway, he died at 47. Renoir was his executor. They went to take the paintings to, there's like 78 paintings or something like that. They went to take the paintings to the National Gallery, and they said, no, we don't want them, right? We don't want them. Those guys are, they literally, they're not scum, but the equivalent of scum, right? He had this beautiful picture, you might see it if you went to the D'Orsay, of a guy sort of shaving the floorboards. It's really quite a famous painting, right? They wouldn't even touch that because they sort of think, like, why would we want pictures with men with their shirts off? This is just way too much for them. But anyway, Renoir and his brother actually were very successful. They eventually got, not the full 78, but something like 40 or 50 of the paintings accepted by the National Gallery. And because it took a long time, there was all these newspaper articles. It was a scandal, right? And it was a back and forth, and it was called the Caillebotte Affair sort of thing. And so they eventually put on one of the first French Impressionist exhibitions in Europe. And of course, thousands and thousands of people came along because they wanted to know what all the whole hullabaloo was about. And guess what? They went and saw those paintings and they went, oh, that Monet's pretty good. It would be good to have some of him. And the old school folk didn't go, but all the new people came along, and the Americans came over and they said, yeah, we want some Renoir and we want some Sicily, and just start to build, if you like. So the popularity just starts from a haphazard way, right? And all of a sudden, have a guess at how many French Impressionists there are out there at the time. Hundreds. But, you know, everyone knows these guys sort of thing, right? Now, 100 years later, this researcher decided to sort of test the idea. And so what he would do is he would take his students and he would just show them a whole bunch of paintings. And out of the Impressionist paintings, they all picked the 7, you know, the popular paintings that we all know. And then he sort of said, okay, well, maybe if I fed them the unpopular paintings. So the next year comes along and he was feeding them on like a 4-to-1 ratio. So 4 people I've never seen before, 1 you've seen before. And then at the end, he sort of said, who do you like? Guess what? It was the 4 that they'd been fed, right? So it's to do with mere exposure. You know, people are just connected to things they see over and over again. Have you ever wondered why politicians, when they're in front of a camera, have people standing behind them? It's just so that we recognise their faces. It's mere exposure. They're just trying to get that face in your head so that when they pop up again, you just feel a little bit more comfortable with them. Scary, right? So, I guess, yeah, he really started to show that these things are kind of haphazard. It does depend on where you start. So again, I suppose the question is then, the Australian modern art canon, you know, could it be that? There's probably some others in there that, you know, we should be thinking about. But I'm thinking also that we need to get Gray's work as well recognised. Canon might be too big a word maybe that I'm thinking, but just, you know, recognition I think is so important. Now, I was, you know, in conversation with Kendra Morgan about the fact that they didn't have a Gray there. And anyway, she swung into action and came over to our house and sort of had a look. And there was one picture that we thought would be perfect for it, and it was this picture here of Heide. So Gray painted this very early in his career. It's like 1945, this picture that's Sheen. And now, so it started off in one location up in the cottage. It's now kind of in pride of place, if you like, in the library. The library is really important for Heide because a lot of things happen in that library. You know, you see lots of pictures of the artists working in there, Joy sort of sketching out things. These are all sort of Joy Hester pictures next to Gray's picture, so that makes a lot of sense. So anyway, that's my little quick run through of Gray and his work, and maybe get us thinking about, you know, how do we get Gray's work more recognised, and hopefully you go and have a look, and I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks guys for coming along. Oh, I was going to say, if you're interested in a retrospective or anything more about Gray, we're just sort of collecting names, so I don't know how well we're pretty good with QR codes now, right? So we should be able to just go there and it should be able to pop your name in, or just go to that URL here. But before I finish, any questions people have? Yes, Paul.
Considering the consequences, why did Gray go to Canberra?
Love. Love, yes. So, you know, so Joy passed away in 1960, and then Gray ended up marrying Joan, who you would have met, right? So in Canberra, and they were in Canberra, yeah. And so while he was in Canberra, he did other things than just, you know, paint. You know, he was the Canberra Times art critic. So there's hundreds of articles that he wrote about, and he was a really great art critic. He was very supportive of, you know, the artists that he went and saw. You know, critical but supportive. But he also worked at the hospital helping disabled kids learn painting and things like that. So he was very engaged in the community. Now, that's not to say he was a saint. He had a mercurial personality. Sometimes, he was that charming fellow who was able to charm the pants off people. And, sometimes he was hard to get on with. This is what you hear from different folk who know him or knew him. So, yeah, but that's why he went to Canberra. Yeah, thanks. Yes?
Are there a lot of these paintings? And where are they located?
Yeah, well, they're located all over the place. But, the estimate that I have in my head, and others might be able to give me a better estimate, but I think there's probably around 300 to 400 paintings.
That you could get together?
Well, no, not even get together. I think that's about how many he painted. Yeah. And there would be a lot in Canberra. But, because the diplomatic corps was going through, there are a lot of people who would buy paintings and take them. So they're spread all over the world. And Joan Gray's wife in Canberra, she had a sort of like a index box full of cards of all the people who bought paintings. So there's a record, but they get out of date, etc. But people like Vincent Price, the actor Vincent Price, I've pulled that one out and that's a good one. So anyway, there's a range of different places they've gone.
Someone was to organise a retrospective.
Yeah.
How hard would it be to get a body of work?
I think it'd be relatively easy. Yeah, relatively easy. Yeah.
Question just about the watercolours. So you're including watercolours in that figure?
No, I wasn't. I was just thinking of so oils, right? Yeah, good. That's actually a good point because a lot of the pictures in the Heide collection are the watercolours. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, guys, thanks for coming along, learning a bit about Gray. And if you have any questions, just get in contact and love to answer them any way we can.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.